The paper stamped "Desertion" was already curling in the fire. Clarence Williams shoved it down with his bare hand, forcing it into the coals, like the word itself might claw its way back out. The flame caught fast, bright and hungry, blackening the ink before it disappeared. At the same moment, a car door slammed outside. Clarence jerked hard. Keys rattled. Close. Too close. No. He grabbed the poker and drove the paper deeper, sparks snapping up against his wrist. Ash burst into the air and clung to his fingers, thick and black. He didn't stop. He pressed harder, grinding the paper down as if force alone could erase it. The front door opened. Dad Clarence turned too fast. The fire popped behind him. Simone stood just inside the doorway, grocery bags in both hands. Winter air trailing in around her legs. Her eyes went straight to the fireplace, to the smoke, to the way his hands were shaking. "What are you burning?" she asked. Clarence didn't answer. The fire crackled loud in the silence between them. A soldier's truth never stays buried in the mud. Simone stepped inside and closed the door. She didn't rush. She walked to the kitchen and set the bags down carefully, one by one, like she was afraid any sudden movement might set something off. "Dad," she said, not loud, not sharp. "What's going on?" Clarence looked down at his hands. Soot had worked its way into every crease. He wiped them on his shirt, but the black only spread. "Just old papers," he said. "Nothing that matters." A corner of paper lifted in the fire. Not gone yet. Simone saw it and moved without thinking. She reached for the dish towel hanging by the stove, wrapped it around her hand, and pulled the fragment free. Heat bit through the fabric. The towel smoked at the edge. She hissed and dropped it on the counter palm, stinging. The page was torn, half burned, but the words were still there. "Desertion, Case San, 1968. Clarence sucked in a sharp breath. He didn't move toward Simone. He moved toward the paper. He grabbed it from her hand and closed his fist around it, crushing it tight like he could stop time if he held on hard enough. "That's enough," he said. Low. Urgent. "Leave it be." Simone stared at him. "Kei-san," she said. "Dad." That was "Don't he cut in?" Don't go there. He turned and headed down the hallway. His steps were heavy, uneven, not angry, just fast, like a man trying to stay ahead of something he could hear gaining on him. "Dad, wait." He stopped at the basement door. His hand stayed on the knob longer than it needed to. His shoulders tightened. The air around him felt braced, like the house itself knew what was down there. "Do not come down here," he said. Not a threat. A warning. Almost a plea. He pulled the door open and disappeared into the darkness. The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. New. Solid. Deliberate. Simone flinched. She stood alone in the hallway, Christmas lights blinking softly behind her, smoke still hanging in the air. The house smelled wrong now, burned paper mixed with pine and cinnamon like something sacred had been scorched by mistake. From the basement came a dull scrape, metal shifting, something heavy dragged across concrete. Simone placed her palm against the door. Dad. No answer. She turned back toward the fireplace. Ash lay scattered in the grate, gray and fragile. She touched it, still warm. Her father never burned things. Not letters, not photographs, not the uniform he kept folded in the iron trunk he never let anyone open. Not even the notice that came the year her mother died. Clarence Williams held on to things, especially the things that hurt. Another sound rose from below, a hollow thump. Then silence. Simone stepped back from the door. Whatever was in that basement hadn't gone away. And whatever happened in 1968 hadn't stayed there either. It had followed her father home. It was still here. If you've ever watched someone you love carry a war they never spoke about, stay with this story. Simone sat on the edge of her childhood bed, the mattress dipping the same way it always had. The house was quiet now. Not peaceful, just still. The kind of quiet that made every small sound feel louder than it should. In her hands was the burned fragment of paper. She unfolded it slowly, careful not to tear what little remained. The edges crumbled anyway, brittle and blackened, leaving soot on her fingertips. Most of the words were gone, but a few had survived. Ruby. Kei-san. 1968. She stared at them until they stopped looking like ink and started feeling like a door she didn't know how to open. Simone stood up. She took one step toward her bedroom door, then another. Her hand reached for the knob. From somewhere below the floorboards came a dull sound. Metal, maybe. Then nothing. She stopped. Her hand stayed there for a long moment. Then she let go. Simone sat back down on the bed. She picked up her phone. The screen lit the room in pale blue, washing over the posters she'd never taken down. She typed carefully. Kei-san, 1968. The results came fast. Photographs. Young men knee-deep in mud. Helmets tilted low. Faces streaked with red clay and exhaustion. Helicopters lifting off through smoke so thick it swallowed the horizon. She scrolled. Articles talked about a siege, about weeks of shelling, about friendly fire incidents buried in after-action reports, about men who never spoke about what they saw. Ruby. She locked the phone and set it beside her. Simone stood again, looked at the door, thought about her father's voice, the lock, the warning. Then she made her choice. She opened her messages and typed. Sorry for pushing earlier. Going to bed. Love you. She stared at it. Hit send. The phone lay silent in her palm. Seconds passed. Then it buzzed. Love you too, baby girl. Simone closed her eyes. She waited until the house settled again, until the pipes quieted, until the floorboards stopped answering every breath. Near midnight, she slipped on her socks and opened her door. The hallway was dark. No light under her father's door. Nothing from the basement. She moved carefully. Each step, placed, not walked. The living room glowed faintly with Christmas lights. Red, green, blue, soft and steady. The tree hummed quietly, a low electrical buzz that felt almost alive in the silence. Simone crouched by the fireplace. She turned on her phone's flashlight and let the beam sweep across the ash. Gray powder, charred flakes, nothing solid. She sifted gently, ignoring the grit under her nails. Nothing. Whatever Clarence had burned, he had made sure of it. She stood and turned toward the basement door. Up close, the padlock looked newer than it had earlier. The brass was clean, untouched by age. It reflected her phone light sharply. She tested it. Solid. Her eyes drifted to the door frame. Fresh scratches. Pale wood showing through chipped paint. Uneven. Rushed. This lock hadn't been there long. Clarence hadn't planned this for years. He'd planned it tonight. Simone stepped back. She pulled on her coat and slipped into her shoes. The back door opened with a soft sigh, letting cold air rush in. She didn't head for the window right away. Her eyes went to the trash bin by the side of the house. The lid wasn't fully closed. Simone hesitated. Then she lifted it. Inside were grocery bags from earlier that evening, empty packaging, and beneath them a stack of folded papers held together with a rubber band so old it had gone slack. Neat. Deliberate. She pulled them out. Department of Veterans Affairs. Her breath caught. The first letter was dated 1975. Dishonorable discharge status. Ineligible for benefits. Her fingers tightened. She unfolded the next. 1982. Same wording, same finality. A third followed. 1995. Denied. Simone sank down on the cold concrete beside the bin, the papers trembling in her hands. All the years came rushing in, the small house, the careful budgeting, her mother sewing buttons back onto coats instead of buying new ones. Clarence fixing things himself because hiring help cost too much. The way he never complained, never explained. It hadn't been bad luck. It hadn't been pride. It had been punishment. Simone pressed the letters to her chest. 50 years. They denied him for 50 years. She folded the papers carefully and slid them into her coat pocket. Only then did she move to the basement window. It sat low to the ground, glass clouded with grime. She wiped it with her sleeve and shined her phone light inside. The beam cut through the darkness and landed in the far corner. An iron trunk, military green, rusted hinges, big enough to hold a life if you folded it carefully. It was covered with a canvas tarp. Simone held the light there, her arm beginning to shake. Nothing moved. She stepped back from the window and turned toward the house. Inside, warmth wrapped around her again. The Christmas lights blinked like nothing had changed. She stood still for a moment, listening. Her father was awake. She could feel it. Whatever he was doing down there, he wasn't finished, and neither was she. Morning came thin and gray. Simone stood at the kitchen counter waiting for the coffee to finish dripping. She hadn't slept. Not really. Her body felt heavy, but her mind kept moving, replaying the night in pieces she couldn't put back together. The coffee maker clicked off. She poured 2 cups. Black. No sugar. The way her father liked it. Clarence came in quietly like he didn't want to disturb something already broken. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from age, but the kind that settles behind the eyes and refuses to leave. They stood there together for a moment, neither of them sitting. The house smelled like coffee and yesterday's smoke. Clarence cleared his throat. "Thanks," he said, "for understanding last night." Simone handed him the mug. Her hand didn't shake. "Of course, Dad." The lie slipped out clean. Too clean. They drank in silence. Clarence stared into his cup like he expected something to rise out of it. Simone watched the clock on the microwave tick forward every second louder than the last. Then came the knock. Heavy. Deliberate. Clarence froze mid-sip. The cup hovered inches from his mouth. Coffee sloshed over the rim, splashing onto his hand. Another knock followed harder. Clarence set the cup down too fast. "Don't answer that." Simone turned toward the front door. "Dad, it's Christmas Eve." "Could be. The neighbors could be." I said, "Don't answer." His voice snapped sharp, cutting the air between them. The knock came again. Simone didn't ask this time. She walked to the door and opened it. An old white man stood on the porch snow, dusting the shoulders of his coat. He wore a veteran's cap, pulled low, the brim shadowing his eyes. His back was straight. Too straight for someone his age. The kind of posture learned young and never unlearned. "Clarence home?" he asked. The voice was steady but not hard. Practiced, like it had been rehearsed more than once. Clarence appeared behind Simone, and the color drained from his face. He stepped forward and pushed the door inward. The man planted his boot against the threshold. Not aggressive, just firm. "You got no business here," Clarence said. The man swallowed. His eyes flicked down, then back up. When he spoke again, his voice wavered just enough to hear it if you were listening. "The colonel's dead, Clarence," he said. "Died 3 weeks ago." Clarence's jaw tightened. The man hesitated, breath catching. He stopped. Started again. I think we're free now." Clarence let out a short laugh. No humor in it. "Ain't nothing free about this. Leave." The man didn't move. Simone looked between them, confusion tightening in her chest. "Who are you?" The man turned to her, slow and careful, like he didn't want to startle anyone. "Robert Miller," he said. "I served with your father. K-san, 68. Clarence swore under his breath. He grabbed Simone by the arm, not rough, but urgent, and pulled her back inside. He stepped out onto the porch and closed the door behind him. Simone stumbled and caught herself against the wall. Through the glass, she watched them. Miller spoke first, hands moving as he talked, palms open, as if he were offering something he wasn't sure Clarence would take. Clarence shook his head again and again, arms crossed tight across his chest, shoulders hunched like he was bracing against a blow. Miller reached into his jacket. He moved slowly, deliberately, like the moment mattered. He pulled out an envelope. It was thick, heavy. The paper looked stiff, with age not new. The seal wasn't decorative. It was old-fashioned, pressed red wax, flattened by a careful thumbprint, as if someone had taken the time to make sure it would not open by accident. Not mail. A keepsake. A duty. Clarence took a step back. Not away from Miller, away from the envelope. Miller extended it. Clarence's eyes fixed on the wax, then dropped. His mouth tightened like he'd tasted something bitter. He did not reach for it. Miller hesitated. His arm trembled. He lowered the envelope and set it down on the porch chair instead. Snow gathered along the edges of the paper, melting into dark spots. Clarence stared at it, breathing shallow. His hands curled into fists at his sides, then opened again. He did not touch it. He looked like a man standing too close to something dangerous, something that could burn without flame. Miller straightened. He brought his hand up in a clean, formal salute. Fingers sharp, elbow locked. He held it there waiting, not demanding, hoping. Clarence stared back. He did not return the salute. Miller's hand dropped. For a moment, neither of them moved. The wind pushed snow across the porch boards. Somewhere down the street, a radio played faint Christmas music. Miller nodded once. A small motion. Acceptance, maybe. Or surrender. He turned and walked down the steps, his boots crunching softly in the snow. Simone opened the door. Clarence stood staring at the envelope, his chest rising and falling fast. "Dad," Simone said. "What that man is dead to me." Clarence said, his eyes never leaving the chair. "Burn that envelope." His voice was flat now. Empty. He didn't reach for the envelope. He didn't even step toward it. He turned away instead, like the sight of it made his skin crawl, like touching it would pull him somewhere he couldn't survive going back to. He brushed past Simone and headed for the basement. Simone watched him unlock the door and disappear into the darkness below. The lock clicked behind him. She stepped out onto the porch. The envelope sat alone on the chair, red wax bright against brown paper and white snow. Simone didn't touch it. Some truths don't get destroyed. They wait. If you're still here, if silence ever stood on your doorstep and knocked anyway, subscribe and stay with this story. She closed the door and leaned against it, knowing whatever lived inside, that envelope wasn't finished with them yet. Simone sat on the couch with the envelope resting in her hands. She hadn't opened it. She hadn't even shifted her grip. The red wax seal caught the noon light and held it dark and dull, now pressed flat by a careful thumb years ago. From below came the sound of movement thuds, a scrape. Something heavy dragged across concrete. Clarence was still in the basement. Simone listened until the sounds slowed, then stopped altogether. She stood and crossed the room. "Dad," she called down. "We need to talk." His voice came back thin through the floor. "No, we don't." She leaned her forehead against the door, breathed once, then straightened. "A man came to our house," she said. "He served with you. He left you something." Silence. I'm opening this envelope, she said. With or without you. The lock clicked. The door opened a few inches, then more. Clarence climbed the stairs slowly. He didn't rush. By the time he reached the top, his shoulders sagged like the weight he'd been carrying had finally shifted. He looked older than he had that morning, worn down. He sat on the couch and stared at the envelope. Dust floated through the afternoon light. The Christmas tree stood unlit, in the corner ornaments dull and still. Clarence spoke without looking up. Open it. Simone broke the seal. The sound was soft, final. Inside lay a thin document, yellowed and brittle. Official. Typed. Dated February 1968. The word desertion sat at the top. Clarence's signature anchored the bottom firm and unmistakable. Beneath it was a photograph. It wasn't clean, it wasn't sharp. The image was grainy, blurred at the edges, caught mid-motion. Mud streaked the frame. Smoke cut across the background. But the shapes were clear enough. A young man hunched forward, straining under the weight of another. The carried man's head lolled to the side. One boot dragged. The carrier's face was half lost to shadow, but the posture was unmistakable. Clarence. The third item was a letter. Handwritten. Careful. Dated 2 weeks ago. Simone looked up. Clarence's hands were trembling now. K-san, he said. February 68. He paused, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the room. We got hit. Artillery. He swallowed. Wasn't Charlie. Another pause. It was ours, he said. Wrong coordinates. Hastings called it in. Simone felt her breath catch. 5 went down, Clarence said. Miller, Hayes, Johnson, Rodriguez, Chen. He nodded once toward the photo. I went back. His voice tightened. He waited for it to pass. Got him out. The room stayed quiet. The colonel needed a story, Clarence said. Couldn't own it. Needed cover. His fingers curled against his knee. He said if I signed, he stopped. Tried again. If I took the fall, they'd be taken care of. Simone leaned forward. You mean benefits? Clarence said. Medical. Survivor pay. School for the kids. He looked at her then briefly. I didn't have any. Simone's voice came out small. You took the blame. For him. Clarence nodded once. I carried it, he said. So they didn't have to. Simone picked up the letter and unfolded it carefully. Clarence, she read. The colonel died November 29th. The man who threatened us is gone. I kept every document. I have the proof. It's time to bring you home. Her voice wavered, then steadied. Clarence stood. He walked to the Christmas tree and touched a small military ornament, the metal cool under his fingers. He didn't smile. Miller held this for 50 years, he said. Same as me. He let the ornament drop back into place. Telling it now won't fix what's gone, he said. Won't give time back. Won't change how it was. He turned toward Simone. I made the call, he said. I lived with it. Simone looked at the paper again. The signature, the photograph, the letter. Her anger shifted, settling into something solid. You shouldn't have had to, she said. Clarence didn't argue. The afternoon light slid across the floor. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere nearby, a door closed. Ordinary sounds moving forward. Inside the living room, the past lay open between them. Simone folded the letter and placed it back inside the envelope. She didn't let go. Whatever came next, she knew this much. The secret was out. And it wasn't finished yet. Clarence fell asleep where he sat. One moment he was upright, staring into nothing, and the next his head dipped forward and his breathing settled. His hands rested open on his thighs. Empty. For the first time since yesterday, his face was calm. Not relieved. Just quiet. Simone stood across the room and watched him. She saw something she hadn't seen before. Peace. Thin and fragile, but real. Like something he hadn't allowed himself in a very long time. Her eyes moved to the basement door. Unlocked. Clarence must have forgotten. Or maybe he hadn't bothered to remember. The decision didn't arrive as words. It arrived as motion. Simone crossed the room. She paused once, listening to her father's breathing, then turned and went down the stairs. The basement light flicked on. One bulb. Weak. Yellow. The iron trunk sat exactly where it always had in the far corner. The tarp was already pulled aside. The lock was gone. Simone didn't stop to take in the room. She went straight to the trunk and knelt. The lid was heavy. She lifted it slowly. The hinges creaked long and loud, echoing off the concrete like a warning she couldn't unhear. Inside, everything was arranged with precision. On top were stacks of letters thick and yellowed, tied into bundles by decade with brown paper twine and old metal clips. 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, VA denial letters, dozens of them. Beneath the stacks lay Clarence's uniform, folded flat edges sharp. The fabric was clean, preserved. The name tape was faded but still readable. Williams. Resting on top were his dog tags, the chain coiled carefully, metal dulled from years of touch. Simone stared. This wasn't a box of old things, it was a record. She lifted the uniform with both hands and set it aside. Underneath was a manila folder, stamped in red. Classified. Her hands hovered over it. Then she opened it. The paper inside was thin and official, the kind that carried weight no matter how little it weighed. Incident report. Confidential. February 8th, 1968. Khe-Sanh Combat Base. Quang Tri Province. Her breathing quickened. She read, At 0347 hours fire support mission executed per Colonel J. Hastings's coordinates. Post-strike assessment revealed friendly casualties due to coordinate error. Grid misread by approximately 500 meters. Her hands began to shake. She kept going. Casualties. 5. WIA. 0 KIA. PFC. Williams remained on site during strike to extract wounded contrary to standing orders. The words blurred. She steadied the page and read again. Recommendation. To preserve operational security and maintain morale, recommend administrative action against PFC. Williams, for failure to follow withdrawal order. Official record desertion under fire. Her chest tightened. At the bottom were signatures. Colonel J. Hastings. Lieutenant Morrison. Captain Bradley. 3 names. 3 confirmations. Then the final line. PFC. Williams's cooperation secured via assurance of benefits protection for wounded personnel. The page slipped from her fingers. It drifted down and landed on the concrete between her feet. Simone's knees gave out. She didn't brace herself. She dropped straight down her back, hitting the trunk, cold metal seeping through her clothes. Her legs lay where they fell. She stared forward, unfocused. The basement window caught the glow from upstairs. Red, green, red again. Christmas lights blinking through dirty glass, washing her face in soft color. She didn't blink. She didn't move. Seconds passed. Then more. She sat there, frozen eyes fixed on nothing, the document resting on the floor like something radioactive. Her father hadn't just taken the blame. He had been used. They had written it down, typed it up, filed it away. They had documented his courage, his refusal to leave wounded men behind, and then buried it under procedure and language. 5 families received benefits, medical care, college tuition, mortgages paid. Clarence received silence, 50 years of whispers, 50 years of rejection letters, 50 Christmases where the answer came back the same. Denied. He chose shame so others could live with honor. Simone finally inhaled. The breath came sharp, like it hurt to take it back. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't sob. No sound came out, just quiet, steady crying. She reached down and lifted the document with both hands now. Careful, respectful. When she stood, her legs shook. She climbed the stairs slowly, one step at a time, holding the papers tight to her chest. At the top, she paused. From the living room came the sound of Clarence's breathing, slow, even. He was still asleep. Simone looked down at the pages once more. There was no going back. If this truth stopped you the way it stopped her, tap like and stay with us. She turned toward the light, carrying something that could never be hidden again. Evening settled over the house slowly. Simone came up from the basement with the document folded inside her jacket. It pressed against her ribs as she moved thin paper carrying a weight that made her shoulders ache. She didn't look at it again. She didn't need to. It was already there. Clarence was awake now, standing at the kitchen counter. He had the kettle on. Steam rose and vanished. His movements were careful, measured like the day had taken more from him than he wanted to admit. Simone sat at the table and reached for the old photo albums stacked against the wall. She chose one at random and opened it casually, like this was something she'd meant to do all along. The covers were worn, the plastic sleeves yellowed. There weren't many pictures. School portraits, a couple of birthdays, Christmas mornings where the tree was small and the smiles were practiced. As she turned a page, something slipped free and landed on the table. An envelope. Old. Creased. Her father's handwriting on the corner, neat and small. Inside were stubs and folded notes. Not the money orders themselves, those were long gone, but the tear-off pieces and envelopes he'd saved. Dates, amounts, short lines written in pencil, $200. For medical. The date read 1982. Simone held it up. "Dad," she said, "did someone send us money back in '82? Clarence didn't turn around. Sometimes. She watched his reflection in the microwave door. His eyes stayed down. Simone opened another album, then another. From 1985, a stub fell out, $150. From 1990, another envelope, $200. From 1998, $300. From 2005, again, always tucked into the back, always marked. The amounts changed. The timing didn't. December, birthdays, hospital months, never the same number twice. Clarence set the kettle aside and finally sat across from her. Started in '78, he said. Little envelopes, no return address, cash at first. Then money orders. Simone looked up. You knew who it was. He nodded once. Only one it could be. Why, Clarence's eyes drifted to the wall where the photograph from the envelope now rested half visible, where Simone had set it earlier. The man I carried, he said. That was Miller. Others got pulled, helped. But him. He paused. He went out cold in the mud. I hauled him the farthest. He looked back at the table. He never forgot. Why didn't you send it back? Clarence shrugged, small and tired. Tried. Pride, you know. But your mama got sick that year. We needed it. He stared at the wood grain. Kept coming. 46 years. Stopped last month. Simone's chest tightened. She pulled the letter Miller had written from the envelope and scanned it again. In the corner beneath the signature were details she hadn't focused on before. A date of birth. 4 digits circled lightly, last 4 of a Social Security number. She didn't call the VA. She called Miller. It rang twice, Miss Williams Miller said. The money, Simone said. All those years. It was you. A long silence answered her. Not all of it. He said finally. Enough to live on stayed with me. You used your disability checks. Yes, ma'am. You didn't fake it, Simone said, careful now. No, Miller said. Didn't fake a thing. PTSD's real as rain, nights, shakes, the works. But I couldn't sit there cashing checks with Clarence's name buried in my file while his family scraped by. Clarence stood in the doorway, listening. "Why didn't you tell the truth back then?" Simone asked. Miller exhaled, slow and uneven. "Colonel said if any of us talked, he'd pull benefits. Court-martial us for false reports. My kids were 3 and 5. Hayes had twins. We were scared. And now I'm 73, Miller said. Colonel's dead. My kids are grown. I don't have much time left, Miss Williams. But I've got proof, and 4 other men ready to testify." "How did you keep sending the money?" Simone asked. "VA disability," Miller said. "Separate lane. Army couldn't touch it. He could threaten court-martial, but VA was civilian jurisdiction. I took the risk. Figured if he came after me, at least Clarence's family would have gotten something by then." The line went quiet. When Simone set the phone down, Clarence was still there. "I knew," he said softly. She slid the stubs back into the albums, careful, almost tender. For the first time, the money didn't feel like charity. It felt like penance. And it felt like the beginning of something that had been waiting a very long time to be finished. Night settled heavy over the house. Simone stood in the hallway and watched her father breathe. Clarence slept on the couch again, one arm draped over the cushion, the other resting on his chest like he was guarding something even in rest. The television was dark. Only the Christmas tree lit the room red and green, blinking softly. "I'm going to bed," Simone said quietly. Clarence didn't open his eyes. He nodded once. She went to her room and closed the door. She sat on the edge of the bed and waited. Counted the minutes. 10, 20, 30. Long enough for the house to settle, long enough for his breathing to deepen. But she didn't lie down. Her mind kept returning to the trunk. Not the documents, not the uniform, the shape of it. When she had lifted the uniform earlier that afternoon, something had felt wrong. The inside depth hadn't matched the outside height, just a few inches off. Easy to miss. Impossible to ignore once you noticed. Simone stood. The basement stairs creaked softly under her socks. She flicked on the light. The iron trunk was still open, lid angled back like a mouth that hadn't finished speaking. She knelt and ran her hand along the inside wall. There. The bottom panel didn't sit flush. She pressed her fingers against it. The wood flexed slightly. Thin plywood. A false bottom. Clarence had built this himself, or had someone do it years ago. Quietly. Simone lifted the panel. Beneath it lay a cassette tape in a clear plastic case, and a small portable cassette player, both wrapped together in brown paper secured with tape that had yellowed with age. The label on the cassette was written in careful block letters. For Clarence. Simone's chest tightened. Miller hadn't hidden this. Clarence had. She understood it immediately. Miller must have mailed it months ago. February, judging by the date she remembered from his letter. Clarence would have received the package, opened it, seen the tape, and known exactly what it was. And he hadn't been able to press play. So he buried it. Simone carried the tape and player upstairs slowly, like the house might hear her if she rushed. Clarence was still asleep. She stood there for a long moment, then reached out and touched his shoulder. "Dad," she said. "Wake up." Miller sent something. A while back. Clarence opened his eyes. When he saw the cassette in her hand, the last of the sleep drained from his face. They sat side by side on the couch. The Christmas tree hummed softly. Simone unwrapped the player, opened the compartment, and slid the tape in. Her finger hovered. She pressed play. Static hissed. Then breathing. "Clarence," a voice said. "Old. Unsteady. If you're hearing this, I'm either dead or I finally found the guts to face you. This is Robert Miller, February 10th, 2024. Clarence stiffened. I'm recording this because writing don't carry weight the same way, Miller continued. You need to hear my voice break. You need to hear how scared I still am. A long inhale. Wind in the background. Quezon, February 7th, 1968. We called the mud Ruby. Not a person. The mud. That red clay that stuck to everything. Got in our wounds, our food, our dreams. Simone's breath caught. You remember Hayes joking, Miller said. Said Ruby was the only woman at Quezon, and she was trying to drag us all to hell. Clarence closed his eyes. Silence followed. 15 seconds of wind and tape hiss. The night it happened, Miller said Colonel Hastings was drunk. We smelled it on him when he gave orders. Told us to pull back to checkpoint Delta. A pause. You questioned him. Said Delta was east. We needed west. He said, you questioning me private? You shut up. We all did. The tape crackled. We moved. Then the sky opened up. Our own artillery. I was hit shrapnel in my back. Went down face first in Ruby. That mud filled my mouth. Miller's voice wavered. I thought I was dead. Then I felt hands. Your hands, Clarence. You said, I got you, Miller. I got all of you. Clarence's shoulders shook. You went back 4 more times. Hayes, Johnson, Rodriguez, Chen. Artillery still coming. You dragged us through that red mud to the real checkpoint. Rain began falling on the recording. 2 days later, Miller said the colonel called us into his tent. One by one, told us the story. You abandoned your post. You were a coward. We were to confirm it or lose everything. A breath. Shaking. He laid out the papers. Benefits, survivor pay, medical, all waiting on his signature. The rain grew louder. Hayes had 6-month-old twins. Johnson's wife was pregnant. Rodriguez's mother had cancer. Chen was sending money home to refugees. A whisper now. And you. You were single. You had no one. Clarence covered his face. You told us to sign, Miller said. We said no. You looked at us and said, that's an order. Clarence sobbed silently. So we signed. We watched you sign the desertion papers. We watched the colonel smile. A long pause followed. I've lived with that lie. For 56 years, Clarence Miller said. And for 46 of those years, I used my disability checks to try and pay back what you lost. The rain softened. The colonel died November 29th. I waited 2 weeks to be sure he was gone. Then I called the others. We're ready. We got documents. We got testimony. We got this tape. Miller's voice steadied. It's time to bring you home, brother. A soldier's truth never stays buried in the mud. The tape clicked off. The red light glowed for a second longer, then faded. The room was silent. Only the Christmas tree hummed. Clarence and Simone sat side by side, not touching, not moving. A full minute passed. Finally, Clarence spoke, voice rough. I told him that was an order. Simone reached over and took his hand. If you believe voices buried too long deserve to be heard, subscribe and stay with this story. Outside, the streetlight flickered. Inside, the truth finally had a voice. Morning light crept in, thin and gray. It was Christmas Eve morning. Simone sat at the kitchen table with Miller's letter spread open in front of her. Beside it lay a legal pad filled edge to edge with names, phone numbers, and hurried notes written in her tight, careful hand. Hayes, Johnson, Rodriguez, Chen. The coffee beside her had gone cold. Clarence stood in the doorway watching her. He had been there a while. She could feel it. What are you doing? He asked. Simone didn't look up. Calling in your brothers. Clarence said nothing. He stayed where he was. Simone picked up the phone and dialed the first number. It rang twice. Hayes residence, a man answered. Is this the family of David Hayes? Simone asked. Specialist. Vietnam. A pause. The air on the line shifted. "This is his son," the man said carefully. "Marcus Hayes." "Who's calling?" "My name is Simone Williams. My father is Clarence Williams. He served with your father at Quezon." Silence. "My father passed in 2019, Marcus said. "I know," Simone said. "I'm so sorry, but I need to ask." "Did he ever talk about my father?" Another pause. "Longer this time," once Marcus said. "Just once." Simone closed her eyes. "I was 12, Marcus went on. "It's a core memory. The only time I ever saw my father cry." His voice tightened. "He told me about a man who carried him through hell, through artillery fire, through red mud that tried to pull them under." Marcus inhaled slowly. "He said that man saved his life so I could exist. Me and my twin sister." The kitchen clock ticked. "Then he told me that man was called a coward," Marcus said. "That the man who saved him was branded a deserter, a beat. My father said, 'Every day I'm breathing belongs to Clarence Williams.'" Simone wiped her eyes. "I'm calling because we have proof she said. Documents, a tape, witnesses. We're gathering tomorrow morning. Christmas Day." Marcus didn't hesitate. "I'm a brigadier general now," he said. "Army. I'm currently in D.C. Simone held her breath. "I'll take a military flight tonight," Marcus continued. "I'll be there by morning. Tell your father I'm coming." She thanked him and hung up. Her hands were shaking. She dialed the second number. A woman answered. Older. Tired. "My husband passed 6 years ago," she said when Simone explained. "But he kept a photo. Your father carrying him. He kept it in his Bible." The line went quiet. "I'll come," the woman said finally. "My kids will drive through the night. All 4 of them." Simone nodded even though the woman couldn't see her. The third call was answered by a man in his 50s. "My father talked about Clarence Williams until the day he died," he said. "Called him Saint Clarence." Simone smiled through tears. "He used his benefits to get through college," the man said. "Became a teacher. Paid it forward his whole life." A pause. "We're in Ohio," he added. "It'll be a long drive, but we'll leave tonight." "Thank you," Simone said. She took a breath before dialing the last number. A woman answered. "Chen residence." Simone introduced herself. There was no pause this time. The woman started crying immediately. "My father is still alive," she said. "He's 78. Dementia. Most days he doesn't know where he is." Simone closed her eyes. "But sometimes," the woman said, fighting through it, "sometimes he's clear." She swallowed. "Last week he was clear. He asked me to find Clarence Williams. Said he needed to apologize before he died." Simone pressed her hand to her mouth. "We're in California," the woman continued. "It's a long flight. It'll be hard on him." A breath. "But we're coming. If this is his last clear wish, we're coming." "Yes," Simone said. "Please come." When the call ended, Simone set the phone down. Her hands were trembling now. Clarence had been listening from the doorway the entire time. He stepped forward and sat across from her. Neither of them spoke. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, someone scraped ice off a windshield. Finally, Clarence said quietly, "They remembered." Simone nodded. "Dad, they've been carrying you their whole lives." Clarence reached for the phone. He dialed without looking at the paper. It rang once. Clarence Miller answered. "Tomorrow morning," Clarence said. "Christmas Day. My house." A pause. A sharp inhale on the other end. "We'll be there," Miller said. "All of us." Clarence swallowed. "Bring everything. We will, brother." Clarence lowered the phone and sat back. For the first time, the weight in the room shifted. Outside, Christmas Eve moved forward. Inside, the reckoning had a time and a place. Christmas morning came clear and cold. Simone touched her father's shoulder gently. "Dad," she said. "They're here." Clarence blinked awake, disoriented. Then he heard voices outside, muffled through glass. Doors closing, footsteps on frost. He pushed himself upright and walked to the window. 5 cars lined the street. People stood on the lawn, stamping their feet against the cold breath rising in white clouds. They weren't talking much. They weren't laughing. They were waiting. Clarence's chest tightened. The doorbell rang once, then again. When Simone opened the door, they came in quietly one by one, as if entering sacred ground. Robert Miller first straight-backed in his dress uniform, medals aligned with care. His hands trembled anyway. Behind him stepped Marcus Hayes, in full-dress blue stars on his shoulders, catching the morning light. He moved with calm authority, eyes steady posture. Exact. The Johnson family followed widow first, then 4 grown children who carried themselves like they had been raised on stories they never fully understood, until now. Rodriguez's son came next with his wife and young daughter. Last came Chen's daughter, pushing a wheelchair slowly, carefully, as if the day itself might break if she rushed it. Clarence stood by the fireplace, the same fireplace where he had tried to burn the past. Simone had moved the furniture earlier, opening a clear space in front of the Christmas tree. The lights glowed softly. No one spoke yet. They looked at one another, recognizing something shared without naming it. Chen's daughter wheeled her father forward. He was small now, thin. His hands shook in his lap. His eyes wandered, then focused. Today, they were clear. "Clarence," he asked, voice weak but sure. Clarence dropped to one knee in front of the wheelchair. "I'm here, brother." Chen reached out. Clarence took his hands. "I never said thank you," Chen said. 56 years, never said it. Tears ran down both their faces. Chen's daughter placed a photograph in her father's lap. The same grainy picture from the trunk. Mud. Motion. A young man carrying another through chaos. Chen tapped the photo with one finger. "You are hero," he said softly. "Not me. You." They held hands, breathing together. No one moved. No one needed to. Then Marcus Hayes stepped forward. "Attention!" Every veteran in the room snapped upright. Clarence did 2 muscle memory answering before thought. "At ease," Hayes said. They relaxed, the moment settling. Mr. Clarence Williams Hayes continued, voice formal now. "I am Brigadier General Marcus Hayes, United States Army, son of Specialist David Hayes, whom you carried to safety on February 7th, 1968. Clarence swallowed. "I am here in official capacity," Hayes said, "authorized to address a grave injustice." He paused. This did not happen overnight. Hayes continued steady and honest. "I made calls all night. I woke up people who did not want to be woken. I used every ounce of rank favor and leverage I have." He looked directly at Clarence. The Secretary's office approved a temporary correction order based on overwhelming evidence and sworn testimony. "The full process will take time, months, maybe longer. But the Secretary granted emergency review authority based on the evidence." A beat. "The truth does not wait, and neither do we." Miller stepped forward and handed Hayes a thick folder. "This file contains," Hayes said, opening it, the original classified report documenting friendly fire at Khe Sanh, sworn testimony from 4 witnesses to coercion audio confessions from the 5 soldiers rescued, and evidence of a 50-year cover-up by Colonel Hastings. Hayes lifted his eyes. By authority granted under this temporary order, he read the dishonorable discharge of Private First Class Clarence Williams is hereby voided effective immediately. A sharp intake of breath moved through the room. His service record is corrected to reflect honorable discharge retroactive to February 1968. Clarence's knees weakened. Simone stepped closer, ready. Hayes continued. For extraordinary heroism under fire, complete disregard for personal safety, and the rescue of 5 wounded soldiers during active artillery, Private First Class Clarence Williams is awarded the Silver Star. Hayes opened a small velvet box. The metal gleamed beneath the Christmas lights, 5-pointed star ribbon blue edged with red and white. He pinned it carefully to Clarence's cardigan, straightening the fabric with practiced precision. Clarence stood at attention. Tears streamed freely now. Hayes raised his hand in salute. Clarence hesitated only a fraction of a second. Then, after 56 years, he returned it. The room saluted as one. "Welcome home," Miller said, voice breaking. "Sergeant Williams." Clarence lowered his hand and let out a breath that sounded like a laugh. "I was never that good with stripes," he said quietly. Simone stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. He held her tightly. The families gathered closer beneath the tree. Someone had brought the iron trunk up from the basement. It sat beside the presents, now no longer hidden. A small voice spoke. "Great-grandpa?" a little girl asked, tugging Marcus Hayes's sleeve. "Who's that man?" Hayes knelt beside her. "That's the reason you exist, sweetheart," he said. "That's a hero." Clarence sat back in the armchair, the silver star resting against his chest. The Christmas lights reflected off the metal. He looked at the old photograph, then at the people around him, children, widows, soldiers, family. He smiled. For the first time, the weight was gone. The afternoon softened into something warm. The long table stretched across the living room, borrowed from neighbors, crowded with plates, bowls, and hands reaching across generations. Food passed slowly. Nobody rushed. Laughter rose and fell in small waves, the kind that comes when people finally feel safe enough to exhale. Clarence sat at the head of the table. The silver star was still pinned to his sweater. Every so often his fingers brushed against it, as if confirming it was still there. Children ran between chairs. Someone spilled a drink. Someone laughed too loud and waved it off. Rodriguez's son stood and bowed his head. For the food, he said, voice steady for family and for the man who made this possible. Amen came from around the table, not in perfect unison, but together. After dinner plates were cleared, chairs shifted, people lingered. Stories came next, not speeches, not announcements, just memories finding their way into the open. Johnson's widow spoke softly. "My husband used his GI Bill to become an engineer," she said. "He built bridges, steel and concrete ones." She smiled faintly. "But he always said Clarence built the first bridge, the one that carried him out of hell." Heads nodded. Someone wiped their eyes. Rodriguez's son leaned forward. "My father opened a community center for veterans, named it the Clarence Project. Never told anyone why." He looked at Clarence. He didn't need to. "Now I understand." Clarence listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't correct anyone. He just let the words land. As evening crept in, the room grew quieter. The light outside faded. Clarence stood. In his hands were the false desertion papers, the lie that had followed him for decades. Miller stepped forward and placed the classified report on top of them. Clarence walked to the fireplace. This time his steps were steady. Simone stood beside him, not leading, not stopping him. Just there. "Let it burn, Dad," she said. "Let all of it burn." Clarence placed the papers into the fire deliberately. One stack, then the other. They curled, blackened, turned to ash. Miller stepped closer, then Chen leaning gently on his daughter, then the other veterans. A quiet circle formed around the hearth. Chen whispered barely louder than the fire. "Burn the lies. Keep the truth." No one spoke after that. When the fire died down, Simone brought the iron trunk into the center of the room. Clarence opened it. Inside lay his cleaned uniform, folded with care. The grainy photograph from 1968, the Silver Star certificate. New letters written that very day by the family's pages, filled with names, thanks, and memories. Simone added the framed photo from that morning. Everyone gathered beneath the Christmas tree. Clarence at the center. Clarence looked into the trunk for a long moment. "This trunk held shame for 50 years, he said quietly. Now it holds honor. He closed it gently. That's the difference truth makes. One by one, the families said their goodbyes. Hugs were long. Hands squeezed shoulders. Promises were made to visit again. Marcus Hayes was the last to leave. "I'm putting you in for back pay, Sergeant," he said. 50 years of benefits. Clarence shook his head. "Give it to Veteran Services. I got everything I need right here." He glanced at Simone. Hayes saluted. Clarence returned it clean, precise, without hesitation. Later that night, Simone hung the framed photograph on the wall. It took the most prominent place in the living room. Below it, she placed a small plaque she had prepared earlier. Sergeant Clarence Williams' Silver Star, recipient, "A soldier's truth, never stays buried in the mud." Clarence nodded once when he saw it. The house settled into quiet. Clarence sat in his armchair by the Christmas tree. Simone brought him tea and set it beside him. He held the old photograph in his lap, the one of him carrying Miller through the mud. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked up at the new photo on the wall. "How do you feel?" Simone asked. Clarence didn't answer right away. "Light," he said finally. "For the first time in a long time, I feel light." She kissed his forehead. "Merry Christmas, Dad. Merry Christmas, baby girl." Clarence drifted into sleep. The Silver Star caught the glow of the tree and glinted softly. His face was calm, rested. Outside, snow fell gently. Inside, the truth had finally found a home. A soldier's truth never stays buried in the mud. If you believe that truth always finds its way into the light, comment, "Amen."